Hi, my name is Gloria RUBAC. I'm an activist with an organization called the Texas Death Penalty Abolition Movement. I've been involved in the fight against the death penalty for decades and decades. Ever since the first execution in Texas after the death penalty was reinstated. And Texas's first execution was December 7th, 1982. The death penalty is obviously a big issue in Texas, but it's an issue that affects the whole country and in some ways the world, although most of the world doesn't use it. The death penalty, I think if I had to sum up what it was, I think that it is actually a crime used, and maybe a terror tactic, used against poor people and particularly against African Americans and other people of color as a way of just letting people know that, hey, we're the state, your life doesn't mean anything to us and we can do to you what we want. Now, I should say that, of course, I'm not in favor of crime or criminals. I mean, I've had an uncle brutally murdered. But when it comes to punishing people, I don't think the death penalty should even come into the question. Up until recently, if you killed somebody in Texas, you got a life sentence, and that was 40 years before you were even considered for parole. So if you're a young person, 20, 25, you're going to be 60 or 65 anyway before you're considered for parole. And by that time, people are so different. I mean, if you're not the same person 40 years later. There's a lot of ways to explain the death penalty. Some people are opposed to it because of on a moral question, a religious question. They don't believe that anybody has the right to take a life except God, and so it's very much part of their morals, and a lot of times that's hooked up with your religious upbringing too. There's a legal standpoint that many lawyers say, you can be executed on a technicality. You can be executed depending on where you live. If you live in a big city in Texas, you're much more likely to get the death penalty than if you live in a little bitty town out in the country, because it's very expensive to charge somebody, try somebody, and send somebody to death row. And that's another issue, is the cost, which, believe it or not, in this economic crisis, the issue of cost is actually an issue that a lot of people are looking at, because it's 2 or 3 times more expensive to execute somebody than it is to lock them up for the rest of their life. The primary issue that our organization looks at when we consider the death penalty is the question of race. Depending on which year, I think this past year 90% of all executions were carried out in former Confederate states, slave-holding states, and I do believe that executions are a continuation of lynchings and that mentality that we have in the Old South. Race permeates everything, from the time you're walking down the street and a cop picks you up, to you getting thrown in jail and how you're treated, to an attorney being appointed to you if you don't have money. And when you go into a courtroom, only 1% of district attorneys are not white. I don't know the percentage of judges that aren't white, but it's not a high percentage of people of color that are judges. So from the beginning, from the time the cop arrests you till the time you go on trial, if you're a person of color, you're in a system that is white. And race is just, it permeates the death penalty. It permeates it. And particularly in the South, but it's the southern states, plus maybe Ohio, that are the ones that do all the executions. There's 35 states that have the death penalty, but it's really very few that actually use it over and over and over again. The state of Texas has carried out over a third of all executions in the U.S. We're almost up to 1,200 executions, and if the one that's scheduled for tomorrow happens, Texas will be up to 450. So, and the next state is Virginia, another southern state, but they're at around 100 executions. And then you have Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, Louisiana, other southern states. I think the Texas case of Clarence Branley is one that really shows how race is used when it comes to the death penalty. Clarence was arrested. He was a custodian at a high school in Conroe, just north of Houston. Right before school started one year, a young white girl, there was a girls' volleyball tournament going on, and a young girl was raped and murdered at the high school in the gymnasium. It was a horrible crime. Clarence, there was 5 custodians. Clarence and an older white man were both picked up. And the older white man, his name was Icky Pease. He was very slow mentally and had a lot of problems. They questioned the two of them, this black man, Clarence Branley, a young man at that time, and Icky Pease. And then they looked at Clarence and they said, well, one of y'all is going to hang for this. And since you're the, and they used the N-word, you're elected. That's what they told Clarence, with not even an investigation. So what they did is the Texas Rangers supposedly spent 500 hours investigating this case, but I think they spent probably those hours constructing a case against Clarence, putting together a case, because there was no evidence, not a single bit of evidence. The evidence that they did find was lost. The girl's underwear, the pubic hairs, disappeared. And then to give you an idea of what the judge did, he was having a fling with the court reporter, and he told her, well, we're going to execute this, and use the N-word, on your birthday. That'll be your birthday present. So there's a lot of really disgusting things that go on in the criminal justice system, and particularly with the death penalty and race. It's just astounding. Now, I want to say that recently, the death penalty has finally started growing out of favor. And I just want to mention a few cases that can explain why Houston, Harris County, which has been the #1 jurisdiction in the whole country to send people to death row for over 2 years now, has not sent a single person. And this is amazing. There have been more people executed from Houston than the whole state of Virginia, which is the 2nd ranking state in the number of executions. But what has happened in the last few years is there has been a number of exonerations, a number of, I think 139 people around the country have been exonerated, and 11 of them have been in Texas. There was 2 in Texas in 2009. But also just a lot of questions. The Chicago Tribune has virtually proven that Todd Willingham was innocent. Now there's fire experts that have shown that he was accused of setting a fire and killing his 3 beautiful little bitty girls. The fire evidence, the arson evidence, has been totally discredited. It wasn't an arson, it was a horrible accident. He was executed in 2004, even though Governor Perry had the information from an arson expert on his desk. But Perry did not stop that execution. This case is causing heads to turn. Another case of Carlos de Luna from Corpus Christi. He has been proven innocent by investigators and so on. None of them have been exonerated yet. I'm hoping that Todd Willingham will be the first posthumous exoneration of somebody that's been executed. And it would be in the whole country. But Todd Willingham's case, Carlos de Luna, Ruben Cantu, the district attorney,